Okay, today's class is sponsored by Dorothy Melvin from Tzvas, in memory of her father, Mordechai ben Yitzchok, whose yahrzeit is tonight in tomorrow. The Neshama should have an aliyah.
Amen.
Okay, last week we learned the din of the 3 weeks. Mitzvah Hashem, next week we'll learn the laws of the 9 days, and the week after that, the laws of Tisha B'Av. Now we're going to go back to where we left off before those dinim, and that was the laws of etiquette of a meal, halacha of, meal time. You have to feed your animals first, but not by drinking, to throw bread. I mean, all the various different dinim. Now, another din Kitzur Shchnarach brings down is it's not nice to stare at somebody who is eating or drinking. It's just not nice to stare at them. Some poskim, believe it or not, right, that only applies if he's getting the food for free. But like he's in a restaurant, he's paying for the food, so then halachically you could stare at somebody. But I'll tell you something, it's not nice to stare at people while they eat. They feel very, very uncomfortable. I know last time we discussed, and I'm not going through the whole thing again, am I allowed to sell food to a person who's not going to make a bracha on it, he's not going to wash on it, he's not going to bench on it? So we'll leave that separate. Now, there's a din of guests, by the way. A guest is not allowed to take food from the communal plate, let's say, and give it to the host's children. The guest is not allowed to do that. Why? Because maybe it's very interesting halacha. Maybe the host doesn't have enough food for everybody, and therefore he's not planning to give it to the kids so much. And now the guest, by giving the food to the kids, will be taking away food from the other guests. So therefore, it's not appropriate to do it. But it says in halacha, if there's a lot of food on the table and you see obviously there's an abundance, ample food, so then it doesn't matter. Okay, another din like this, and this is a very important din with a million details. I'm not going into all the details because it's very, very complicated. But I just want to mention the general law. When a person eats somewhere, okay, whether it's drinking, eating, washing, the benching, and all that, before you leave your place, you should make an after bracha. And sadly, many people eat and they forget to make an after bracha. Sometimes, the bracha before eating, everybody remembers to make basically. And a lot of times you see people eating, and it's interesting, when the Rabbi used to finish Fabrengens, the Rabbi would always announce that Divas dafen machen a bracha achrena soll nicht vergessen machen a bracha achrena. And the Rabbi used to announce that whoever needs to make the after bracha, don't forget to make the after bracha. Why? Because again, people make a bracha, and then you get carried away, and you just leave the table, and you forget to bench or to make alamichi or bring the kosher or whatever it may be. Now, what happens if a person left the table and they left the house, and now they reminded themselves that they didn't make an after bracha? So the din is, can they make it where they remember, or do they have to go back to the original place where they ate? And there's a lot of details. For instance, if it's cake or bread, they can make the after bracha where they are. But if it's through shahako things, technically you would have to go back to the place where you ate, okay, to make an after bracha. And it's very complicated. Did you have in mind? Did you not have in mind? The only time it's customary to do this, and I'll tell you where it's done, when they make the bracha, when they start eating, know they're going to go finish somewhere else. For instance, many times you have a sheva brachas. Not everybody is invited to come to the meal. They're invited to come, after eating for sheva brachas. So now the question is, okay, I'm going to be eating Friday night in my house. I'm going to be washing. And I have in mind, when I wash, I know I'm going to finish the meal at the sheva brachas. Or somebody invited me for dessert. And I know when I make a meitzi, I know that I'm going to eventually basically be going somewhere else to make to eat, continue eating. So then it's okay. But that's only if you had in mind at the time you made the bracha that you're going to be finishing somewhere else. Otherwise, it's a very complicated din when you have to go back, when you don't have to go back. And so therefore, the best thing people should always remember, you finish eating, you make an after bracha, whether it's on a michya or very nefashir or benching, and then you don't have that issue. What happens if a person's in the middle of eating and then they realize you have to go daven mincha? So let's say they're going to be davening at the home, in the house. There's no minyan or whatever. So you don't have to make hametzi again or the brachas again. Even if you went to shul,
Mortgage immediately.
even if you went to shul, you still don't have to make a new bracha when you come home. If when you left, you had in mind and you were careful that you knew that the whole time you're going to be coming back to eat. So then the halacha is you don't have to make a new bracha. Another important din that many people are unaware of, and that is, this doesn't apply if you're a guest in somebody's house, or sometimes I'll explain the details of the din. If a person finished eating and he says, let's bench, anything else which is brought to eat now, he has to make a bracha. Because once he said, let's bench, he basically finished the meal. Whatever he's going to be eating or drinking now, even if he's going to be drinking water, he needs to make a new bracha on it. Why? Because the fact that he said, let's bench, it's, or many opinions say even if you just thought it. Okay. Now, if you're in somebody else's house, so then the fact that you said or you thought, let's bench, you're done eating and let's go bench, is not going to obligate you to make a new bracha because you're dependent on the opinion of the host, hostess, host, whatever. In other words, if the hostess is going to be telling you come to somebody's house to eat, in your mind, okay, they already served dessert and that's it. You know, as far as you're concerned, you're going to go bench. And then the hostess brings out something else. You don't have to make a new bracha on it, even though you thought you're going to be benching, because a guest in the house of a host and hostess is relying on basically the host and hostess. So therefore, even though I said let's bench, it really doesn't matter. But generally speaking, if a person is eating somewhere and he makes up his mind he's going to bench or make an after bracha, the best thing to do, make the after bracha, and then if you want to continue eating, make a new bracha. That's what Halachos said, because there's a lot of details in what a person should be doing. Okay. Next, what happens, by the way, if a person fell asleep during the meal? Friday night, it's known in many religious circles that after the fish course, if you're lucky, the soup course, half the table is out. You know, they're sleeping. So if it's a temporary sleep, you don't have to make a new bracha when you wake up. If it's a permanent sleep, I'll explain to you what the difference is in this din in a second. So then you do have to make a new bracha. And the poskim write, in this case, what is considered a temporary sleep or a permanent sleep? Permanent sleep is when you go into the bed. You go into bed and you sleep, so that's called a permanent sleep. If you sleep on your, on your hand, you put your head down and fall asleep, that's called a temporary sleep. So even if somebody sleeps during the meal, it's a temporary sleep, you don't have to make a new bracha when you get up and you continue eating. Okay, next.
Does that mean washing them the whole thing?
It might, yeah, if in other words, well, we learned already, if somebody uses the facilities, uses the washroom, the restroom in the middle of eating, and you're planning to eat more bread, you have to wash netilas yadayim again without a bracha. We learned that then before. If you're eating any other type of food, then you don't have to make a bracha. But if you're going to be eating bread, so then you're going to have to wash again, even though you don't make a new bracha, hametzi, on the bread. Okay, next dinim is like this. On what foods And this is a very practical din. And what foods does a person need to make a bracha on in the middle of a meal? In other words, a person washed for bread. What does that hametzi cover for the meal? And what do I need to make a bracha on? Okay, so the din is as follows. Anything which is normally eaten to accompany bread, meaning it's being eaten to fill you up. You're eating it to fill you up, such as meat, fish, eggs, rice, things like that, things that are eaten usually as a filler in the meal. That is all included in the bracha of hametzi and in birchas hamazon. So you don't have to make a bracha on anything that you're eating during the meal. But if it's something that is not eaten normally to fill you up, i.e., fruit. Somebody is going to be eating fruit. And here we have two things. You have eating fruit as a dessert at the end of the meal. And sometimes people eat fruit during a meal. I'll give you a simple example. I know in our shul we had this many times in the good old days, that in the middle of Shalosh Shuddis, they would also serve watermelon. Not as a dessert, though, tuna fish, whatever, with watermelon. So now the question is, somebody in the middle of together with the tuna fish or whatever, they're eating a watermelon. They're eating a piece of watermelon. That watermelon, even though you're not eating it as a dessert, but fruit, you have to make a bracha on the fruit because fruit is not a food which is eaten to fill you up. Therefore, if somebody in the middle of a meal takes a grape or a cherry, plum, peach, or you name it, fruits, then you have to make a bracha on that fruit. If it's not made to fill you up. Now, what happens if somebody wants to eat a meal, okay? Let's say they're going to wash and their meal is bread and a watermelon, bread and peaches. Give you an example. Some people have peaches and cream, okay? Or blueberries and cream, whatever it is. Now the question is, that is my meal. My meal is going to be, just for clarity, let's keep this example. My meal is going to be bread and watermelon. That's what I'm eating for lunch. So then the din is like this. If that's what you're eating as your meal, it says in Shulchan Aruch, you have to take the first bite of fruit, of the watermelon, with a piece of bread in your mouth together. If you eat a piece of bread with the fruit together, and that's your meal, then you don't have to make a bracha, even though you're continuing to eat the fruit without bread. Okay? Now, another din over here is, the only time you don't make a bracha on food during the meal is if you're eating bread as a meal, as the staple of the meal. But what happens, let's say, a person is going to have 10 different foods, and he's too lazy to make a bracha on each food. So he's going to start off the meal with a little bit of bread. He's not planning to eat a kazayis. He's not planning to bench. He just doesn't want to make all these brachas. So what's he going to do? He's going to start eating the meal, a tiny piece of bread, and then, he won't have to make a bracha. That doesn't work like that. Then you have to make a bracha on every single food. The appropriate bracha for that particular food. If you're eating a meal of bread and your meal is bread and fruit, so then Halachos says you start eating the first piece of fruit together with bread, and then you don't have to make a bracha anymore on the food. So bottom line is as follows. Things that you're eating during the meal, which normally is eaten to fill you up, is included in the hametzi. If it's not eaten to fill you up, so then the din is you have to make a bracha. Therefore, on most desserts, you have ice cream for dessert, fruit for dessert, cake. We'll see in a second. Cake is a whole complicated thing. Somebody's going to have fruit for dessert. Somebody's going to have ice cream for dessert. Somebody's going to have whatever. You have to make a bracha on the dessert because it wasn't eaten to fill you up. And if it's not eaten to fill you up, it's not included in the hametzi of the bread. Now, what's the story with cake? Okay? The story with cake is as follows. I'll tell you what it says in Shulchan Aruch. In Shulchan Aruch it says, it depends why you're eating the cake. If you're eating the cake because you're still hungry, then you don't make a bracha on the cake. But if you're eating the cake because it tastes good, it's dessert, you're already full. You're already full. But yeah, 1 second. I'll answer your question in a second. But you're eating the cake. It's a good cream cake, mousse, a 7-layer cake, 12-layer cake, or something. You're eating it for enjoyment. Then the halacha is you do make a bracha on the cake. That's what it says in halacha. So again, if you're eating the cake because you're still hungry, then you then you don't have to make a mezainis on the cake because it was covered with damnins. If you're eating it for enjoyment, le'edun uletainu, as it says the expression, then halachically you do have to make a bracha on the cake. Okay? Now, what happens if this cake is made what's called pasa babikisnin, which means dough cake made with flour and juice and a thick batter. Give me an example. A Danish is thick batter. It's not pourable batter like sponge cake or the other cakes. It's a thick batter. And it's made with juice, so therefore it's mezainis, it's not hametzi. But because there are opinions that say pasa babikisnin of that nature is always hametzi, so then at the end of the meal, you don't make a bracha on such cake, even if you're eating it for enjoyment. So which means as follows. If I'm eating a cake, which is a pourable batter, like sponge cake.
Versus dough?
Huh?
Versus a dough cake?
Versus a dough cake, which is a thick cake. If it's a pourable batter, then again, if you're eating it because you're hungry, you do not make a bracha on the cake. You're eating it because you enjoy it, then you do make a bracha on cake. But if it's cake, which is a thick dough, and even you're eating it for enjoyment, you don't make a bracha on the cake. Now there is a vart that by Chassidim, they didn't make a bracha on cake. I'm not saying you should do this because Chassidim of yesteryear were great people. They said, eating for enjoyment? No, we don't eat that. We eat because we get full. That's what they're served, is what we eat. So Chassidim of yesteryear didn't make a bracha mezainis and cake at the end of the meal. But I'll tell you, for instance, the old Rabbi Reichik of Shalom, when he was served cake at the end of the meal, what he did was he benched first and then he ate the cake. Because then you don't have any shaila. Do you make a bracha on the cake or don't you make a bracha on the cake? If you bench and then you eat the cake again, there's no question that you have to make a new bracha on the cake. I mean, it's not a big deal. But now another law, what about drinks during the meal? Do you make a bracha on drinks during the meal? So everybody says like this. If it's wine, you're drinking wine during dinner, you have to make a bracha on the wine. In other words, you go to a wedding, you wash, or in your own home, you wash for dinner, and then in the middle you're going to take a cup of wine. Everybody says you need to make a bracha on the wine. Why? Because wine is a prominent drink, and because wine is a prominent drink, you always make a bracha on wine, even if you eat it during the meal. You drink it during the meal. All the other, all the other drinks, soda, juice, tea, coffee, you don't make a bracha. What about whiskey, mashke? So in halacha, there's two opinions. The Pearl Alter Rebbe writes that the minhag in our countries is we do not make a bracha in the middle of the meal on whiskey. Okay, so the bottom line is the only thing you make a bracha out of drinks during a meal is wine. You make a bracha. Now, what happens if somebody drank wine before the meal and they knew they were going to drink more wine during the meal? Because they made a bracha before the meal and they know they're going to drink wine during the meal, then you don't make a new bracha on the wine. Like for instance, Shabbos, let's say, so there's two aspects of Shabbos. Shabbos, when you make Kiddush before washing, because you're not allowed to eat before Kiddush, so that wine is automatically part of the meal because you're not allowed to eat before Kiddush. So that wine allows you to eat challah or bread or matzah. So then you don't make a bracha during the meal on the wine. What happens if you heard Kiddush already? You heard Kiddush, and so you, your wife, everybody heard Kiddush. But you want to make Kiddush again at home. You want to make Kiddush at home before you wash. Then the din is, if you're going to drink wine before the meal, and you know during the meal between the fish and the meat, you're going to be drinking in more wine, then you don't make a bracha on the wine. Because you already made a bracha before eating, and you had in mind. Now, all these things that we mentioned before, fruits that you make a bracha at the end of the meal, or desserts, or whatever it is, benching Birchat Hamazon covers it, the after bracha. Even though you made a bracha ha'etz at the end of the meal on the fruit that you're having for dessert, nevertheless, you don't have to make an after bracha because benching covers it. Okay? So benching covers everything that you ate during the meal. Benching will not cover necessarily what you ate before you wash. But benching will cover everything that you ate during the meal, even though during the meal, you need to make a bracha on that cake or fruit or ice cream or whatever it is, but you don't have to make the after bracha. Okay, now a question was asked. I thought you make a meitzi regardless of the amount, but wash without a bracha of small amount. Yeah, that's a true statement. You always have to make a meitzi on the tiniest piece of bread. You have to wash for bread no matter how much you're going to be eating. Okay, but what I was talking about is a different thing. What happens if somebody is eating bread, not because he wants to eat bread? He doesn't want to make a bracha on everything else in the meal. So start off the meal with a little piece of bread, but he's not eating the meal of bread. His intent is just to make a bracha at the beginning, that he shouldn't have to make all this. Or somebody knows they're not eating a lot, they're going to take one bite of bread. Okay? Many times, even Shabbos or weddings, whatever, people wash and they just make they know they just want to drop a tiny piece of bread. They're on a diet. They don't want to eat to eat, whatever. They want to make, they're not eating the meal of bread. Then they really have to make a bracha on all the food they're going to be eating because they're not eating it as part of a meal of bread. Because you're not eating bread as the meal. You're eating bread as a little bit at the beginning, and that doesn't count. So then you'd have to make a bracha on the things that you eat during the meal in that case. Now, there's a very interesting din. Well, there's a Gemara that says, we mentioned before that if you're eating because you're still hungry, so then sometimes, on the cake, you don't make a bracha. Otherwise, but we find this an interesting thing. I always tell this Gemara to people. There's a Gemara in Megillah in a few places. Ravcha lepsuma shchiach. There's always room, this is what the Gemara says. There's always room in the stomach for sweet food. The Gemara tells a story about Abaya He ate a ton of food. You can't imagine how much he ate. And then he ate another place. He ate again. And he came to somebody's house. They served him dessert, and he ate it anyway. So somebody asked, "How can you eat so much?" He says, "There's meaning there's always room in the stomach for sweet food." That's why you use American expression. As stuffed as somebody is in the meal, they can always eat dessert. Because that's what the Gemara says. A person will always have room for sweet foods in the stomach. Okay. Next thing is like this. The dinim of what's called mayim achreinim. Mayim achreinim is the water that we wash our hands with at the end of the meal. Okay. Let me tell you an interesting concept. The Gemara talks about, Shulchan Aruch talks about, but not everybody keeps all three today. And that is as follows. We know there's Natilas Yadayim before washing for bread. That's called Mayim Rishonim. Mayim Rishonim means the first water. You wash for bread. That's the first time you wash. According to Halacha, if you, between fish and meat, you have to wash your hands. That's called Mayim Emtsoim, the middle waters. And then at the end of the meal, we have what's called Mayim Achreinim, which means the after waters, which you wash your hands right before benching. Now, Mayim Rishonim.
What was the second one?
I'm going to say it again.
Oh.
The first one is Mayim Rishonim, Natilas Yadayim, that you need to wash for bread. That's mandatory. One of the 7 mitzvahs of the Rabbanan. You have to wash your hands for bread. Mayim Achreinim. What's the purpose of Mayim Achreinim? Washing your hands before you bench. Because in the olden times, they had a salt that was called Melech Zdainis. By the way, those that say Korbanos every day, we say that word Melech Zdainis. Saramai is from Zdaim. That salt was very, very powerful, very dangerous. And they used to have that salt during the meal. And then if somebody would, God forbid, touch their eyes with that salt and their fingers, they could go blind. That's how powerful that salt was. So Mayim Achreinim, I'm talking about halacha now, not kabbalistically. Mayim Achreinim, halachically, is for danger. To wash your hands and get rid of that salt that's on your fingertips, that God forbid you shouldn't touch your eyes and get blind. Therefore, many opinions say that because today we don't have that Melech Zdainis, so therefore today you don't have to wash Mayim Achreinim, which kabbalistically is not for now because it's late. We have to go to Tanya. Kabbalistically, it's very important to wash Mayim Achreinim. You have to wash Mayim Achreinim. Mayim Emtsoim is between fish and meat. Now we learned already, you're not supposed to eat fish and meat together. It's dangerous. So years ago, in the olden times, they didn't have cutlery like we have today. People would eat with their hands. They would eat fish with their hands, and then they would eat meat with their hands. They didn't have spoons, forks, knives like we have today. So then, because people would eat fish with their hands, and then you're going to be eating meat with your hands, so you're going to have fish on the meat. So therefore, that was an issue that you had to wash your hands. Mayim Emtsoim Halacha says that today we don't eat fish with our hands, usually. I know people that do, but usually you don't eat fish with your hands, and therefore there's no need to wash Mayim Emtsoim. What? And again, this is just the introduction, then we're going to go to Tanya. What was your question?
You know the Mayim Achronim that we have, right. The little thing. I was told that the clay one is kosher, but we not to use the silver one anymore.
Okay, that we'll discuss in a few weeks. When we go next week, we're going to learn 9-day dinim. Then we're going to learn Tisha B'Av dinim. And we go back, we're going to get back to Mayim Achreinim and discuss it properly. Why the previous Rebbe writes in a sicha that we don't use silver, mayim achreinim. When Mashiach comes, we'll be able to use silver. But that is a Chabad minig, it's not halakha. Okay, Tanya time.